Hello, QPs. I wanted to talk to you guys today about the brain. Okay, I'm going to make a slide with a lot of different video clips for you to watch later from YouTube about the brain. And I'll put some disclaimers on some of them or prior to some of them because they could be, we're talking about the brain. So it can be a little uneasy or make you guys queasy a little bit watching some of them. All right, so let's talk about the brain. I want you to make sure that you have your brain, parts of the brain document out in front of you so we can go along with that and you can fill in any blanks that you need, okay? First off, I want to talk to you about the types of tissues that are found within the brain. There's both gray matter and white matter, okay? And so the central nervous system that controls both the brain and the spinal cord, okay? The central nervous system is made up of both gray matter and white matter, okay? Gray matter, there's an abundant supply of that in both the cerebellum and the cerebrum and the brainstem and the anterior spinal cord, okay? The gray matter has a pinkish gray color in the living brain, and it contains cell bodies, which would be like dendrites and axon terminals of neurons. It's where all the synapses occur. The white matter is basically bundles of neurons, okay, bundles of axons, coated with myelin, and their job, again, the myelin's job is to make sure that the message is sent along. Okay, so just a brief difference between the two. Usually College Board doesn't ask questions about gray and white matter, but I wanted to throw that in there just to be on the safe side. Okay. Something that you're going to read about a little bit later in our modules of our textbook is something called brain plasticity or neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity, it refers to the brain's ability to modify itself after some type of injury or illness. Usually if there is a damaged part of the brain, if like part of your frontal lobe is damaged, if an individual has a stroke, damage to their language area of the brain, other parts of the brain can take on the functions of those parts that have been damaged, okay? And that's called brain plasticity, so that the brain kind of helps each other out here. The younger you are, okay, where it shows there the children's brain are more plastic than others, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be able to recover from the injury with brain plasticity than the older you are, okay? So when injuries happen here, the brain can remold pathways to take on different functions, and that helps us, again, with times of injury. The younger you are, the better off you are with brain plasticity, okay? And you'll read, again, a little bit about that later. Okay, so let's look at some of the brain structures, okay? The oldest part of the brain here is called the hindbrain. This is the hindbrain and is located in pink, okay? The green part here is the midbrain, okay? It's just above the hindbrain. And then you've got the forebrain, okay, is up here, and then the cerebral cortex, which is a part of the forebrain, and it is all those wrinkly areas of the brain, and that includes our lobes and association areas. Okay. As I said before, the hindbrain is the oldest part of the brain. And by what I mean by that is that it's the part of the brain that develops first. Okay, so when a baby is developing, the brainstem and the brainstem is in the hindbrain is the oldest part of the brain. It's again it's where life starts, okay? It's responsible for automatic survival functions, so therefore your life support system needs to happen first for a baby to continue for its survival while in the womb, okay? So the hindbrain is the structure just atop of the spinal cord, and it controls our basic biological structures, okay? Again, it's the part in purple. The brain in purple makes up the hindbrain. It's the oldest part of the brain because it develops first. It contains our automatic behaviors and survival responses. This is another way of kind of looking at it down here at the brainstem and the hindbrain. Okay, this is the part here that develops first. So let's go ahead and go over parts of that in more detail, starting with the medulla. The medulla oblongata, that is our life support system, located just above the spinal cord. It's involved in blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing. Okay? That's what it's all involved with. It also helps to regulate some reflexes. Okay? It sets the pace of your respiratory movements. If your medulla is not working, you are not working and you die. Okay, so the medulla is very important for our survival, and that's why it helps to develop it first. Pons are just above the medulla, and I don't think pons are on your list, but add them to your list because pons are also very important that you need to know. So they're located just above the medulla. They connect the hindbrain and the midbrain and the forebrain. They're responsible for these fun facial expressions that we have. Okay, they're involved in facial expressions. They also help with the coordination of movement, respiration, waking, sleeping, dreaming. All of those things is what the pons have control over. Okay, so you've got the medulla, the pons, and now you have the cerebellum. The cerebellum is also known as kind of like the little brain. It's also called the little brain. It's located right here. Okay, here's your pon. The pons kind of look like your brainstem is pregnant. Okay, it's right there. And this is your medulla down here, and this right here is your cerebellum. So your cerebellum, as you can see from this viewpoint, okay, it expands all the way across both hemispheres of the brain. Okay, it expands both sides here. It's not just on one side or the other. So it's also known as the little brain, and it helps coordinate movements and balance. Okay, an athlete, a dancer, a musician who plays an instrument, they have a highly developed cerebellum because it helps with those coordination of those movements needed to be able to perform those tasks. Okay, so those fine motor movements are part of the cerebellum. Those implicit procedural memories, that's what takes place in the cerebellum. Cerebellum helps to control these. So it helps maintain balance, posture. It also helps you judge a little bit of time. Okay? Alcohol will impair this part of the brain because you think about it, it's responsible for coordination and balance. Alcohol disrupts that. Someone who drinks too much alcohol, consumes a lot of alcohol, their coordination balance is out the window and they might fall over more easily. Okay, so that's the hindbrain. And now let's move on to the midbrain. Okay, so the midbrain coordinates simple movements with sensory information. Okay, one of the most important structures here of the midbrain for you to know is this reticular formation. Okay, the reticular formation, it controls arousal and ability to focus our attention. The word arousal here, what this means is that you are alert. So if it's stimulated, your brain here, you're alert, you're ready to go, you're aroused, you can understand what's going on around you. If the reticular formation is destroyed, then that could cause a lot of problems where comas occur. Okay? Not all comas occur because your reticular formation is damaged. Keep that in mind. But if your reticular formation is severed, you can go into a coma for which maybe you don't ever wake up from because it's going to be very difficult for doctors to put back together this neural band of fibers that extend through the brainstem inside of it all the way up into the thalamus. So it's going to be hard to put that together. So if this is destroyed or damaged, I mean, that coma is probably going to be the rest of your life, okay? Because if your medulla is still working, then you still have those life support functions, you just are not alert and awake, okay? Lastly, before we get to the cerebral cortex, we've got the forebrain. So the forebrain is what makes us human and what makes us different than other animals, okay? It's the largest part of the brain. It's made up of the thalamus, the limbic system, and then the cerebral cortex. Okay? So we're going to start with the thalamus. The thalamus is kind of like egg-shaped a little bit, and I'll show you that on an image in just a minute. The thalamus is like the sensory switchboard. Okay? Here's our switchboard lady. So what it does is it receives sensory signals from the spinal cord and sends them to the forebrain, all senses except for smell. The olfactory bulbs work with that. So the thalamus is going to control all of our sensory stimuli except, again, for smell. Any type of sensory information. You're seeing things, feeling things, your thalamus is going to send information to other parts of the brain and the body and how to deal with that sensory information. It also contains the pineal gland, okay, and that helps secrete melatonin. If you're familiar with what melatonin does, melatonin helps with the initiation of sleep and the cessation of sleep. So when it starts to get dark outside, your body naturally, that pineal gland naturally produces more melatonin to help initiate your sleepiness. And then as it starts to get light outside, it initiates, hey, less melatonin to be exerted and secreted, and then you start to wake up and you're less tired. If you have problems sleeping, sometimes doctors might tell you to take extra melatonin at night, and then again during the middle of the night if you wake up, and that might help in some situations. Okay, so let's move on then from the thalamus to the limbic system. This right here, this is the thalamus, okay, I was just talking about. This is your pons, this is your medulla and your brainstem, this is your cerebellum, okay, so here is the thalamus, okay, and then the limbic system includes the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. The pituitary gland is not a part of those. The pituitary gland, if you add on some information on that, that helps regulate growth. So it releases growth hormones, and you'll also, it's the master gland of all the endocrine system, which you'll learn about a little bit later. Okay, so the limbic system in general is associated with emotions such as fear, aggression, drive for food, and also sex. So we're going to break it down and talk about each one of these individually, starting with the hypothalamus. Okay, so the hypothalamus, hypo means beneath, so it's beneath here, this blue part beneath the thalamus. Here's the thalamus, here is the hypothalamus. People say maybe it's the most important part of the brain because it's got a lot of maintenance activities that it's responsible for. A body temperature, regulating your body temperature. If you're hot, then it's going to help cool you down by initiating sweating. If you're cold, it's going to initiate your body to shiver to warm you up. It's also responsible for that sexual arousal. It's got arousal parts to it. Hunger, it's going to initiate, hey, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, okay, and also help support the endocrine system. Okay, so it sets those appetite drives, it sets emotional states, it's an autonomic function, so it goes, it's on its own. So here, it's the most powerful structure. And just to give you a little more information on that, is there was a research done on a rat, and this rat had electrodes implanted right into the hypothalamus, which is that pleasure center, okay? And then they wanted to see what happens if we stimulate that hypothalamus there. Well, what happened is this reward center was stimulated, and this rat would climb across the electric grid and come over here, and he would hit the food pellet button, okay? Every time he got food, it'd make him feel better, and every time he hit this button, he would get a zap. Every time he hit that button, he would get a zap, 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 zap. So what happened is this rat would push this button 7,000 times an hour until he collapsed from exhaustion. He pushed that lever so many times, and every time he did, he felt like this pleasure. Normally you get this food that comes out of this, but instead it was an immediate electric sensation or impulse sent to that hypothalamus. Okay. So he was he was exhausted from all of the good feelings he had. The hippocampus. Okay, so the hippocampus is another part of that limbic system. It's involved with processing and storing of explicit memories. It's important to note that memories are not stored here permanently. They're processed here, and it's kind of like a shipping center of, okay, so the hippocampus is going to figure out, okay, this memory needs to be stored here, stored there. Okay, if it's damaged, the hippocampus, you will be unable to process new memories of facts and episodes. Like you can't remember anything new. You could remember old, but you are unable to remember any new information. Okay, so that's what happens with the hippocampus. Lastly, of our limbic system is the amygdala. Okay, the amygdala is involved in volatile emotions like anger, fear, aggression, rage, okay, power. Okay, it's powered by the autonomic nervous system. Okay, and as a part of that prefrontal cortex, that's what controls it. The prefrontal cortex controls this amygdala. Okay, so emotions of anger have not changed much through evolution, as you can see. Okay. I do have about 30 seconds left on this timer for this lecture. Okay, we're going to stop here, and I'm going to catch up with our next recording on the cerebral cortex. Okay, so we'll stop here and catch up on our next recording on the cerebral cortex.